most non-compliant aspects of sites is not filling out these deviation logs. So I don't know why that is. I think maybe sites feel bad that they committed a deviation, so they don't want to document it anywhere else other than where it is in the source. And that could be problematic, especially when you are a CRA and you're a sponsor and you're making sure that all the deviations have been reported to the IRB and to the sponsor. It's much easier to do it if it's on a log, as opposed to having to look through all your monitoring reports from the past and compare it to the source documents of the patients. It's just much simpler to have a master deviation log. So a deviation, just a quick refresher, I know this is the advanced course, is anything not done in accordance with the protocol. So some are minor, like out of window visit for a patient, and some are major, like we dosed the wrong IP to a subject. Okay, that's obviously they're both deviations. One might actually be a GCP violation, and both would need to be, in most cases, both need to be in the monitoring report. Both would need to be on the log for sure. And from those two examples, maybe just one, if not both, need to be reported to the IRB. So that's the next bullet point. Some deviations, not all, need to be reported to the IRB if they impact patient safety in any way. So if the PI or the sponsor can argue that the out-of-window deviation did in fact impact patient safety, then that should be an IRB reportable deviation, as opposed to the dosing the wrong IP to a subject. That's no question about it. That's a major deviation that affects patient safety. So that would go to the IRB. So sometimes these deviations are clear, and other times they're not so clear. And when in doubt, it is always up to the sponsor to determine whether it impacts patient safety or not. And these are cases sometimes where the PIs will actually argue with you about whether it impacts patient safety or not. In my opinion, at the end of the day, it's the sponsor's responsibility to have the final say in this issue. Some deviations are intentional. So some deviations are intentional, for example, to reduce risk to a patient. So if a patient came in for a visit and is supposed to take, according to the protocol, their IP, but the PI determines that it's not safe for that patient to dose at that particular visit for whatever reason, because it's of their safety, then that would be a deviation. The interesting question there would be, is that IRB reportable? And I think it would be, even though it's to reduce the risk to a patient rather than increasing risk to a patient. You're doing an intentional deviation to reduce risk to the patient, but it's still a patient safety issue. So it should, in my opinion, still be sent to the IRB. And again, these are the areas where there's no clear consensus on what should be done. And so really it's up to the sponsor, and then many times it's also up to the IRB. So you may want to, if you're a sponsor or a CRA, you may want to ask the IRB if you have a particular question where there's like a gray area issue. It's not black or white. You're not sure whether it should be reportable to the IRB or not. Like in this case of the intentional deviation to reduce risk to a study subject. So these kind of deviations happen. Those are actually good deviations when you're reducing risk to a patient. Most, however, are inadvertent, usually require the CRA to discover it, because most of the time the site is unaware that they committed a deviation, especially when they're mostly inadvertent, which means it's a mistake, right? And sometimes sites don't recognize they made a mistake. So this is why we need CRAs to be hyper vigilant when it comes to looking at deviations, even if they're minor, like out of window. A very common deviation is these out of window visits. So really, unless the EDC is automatically triggering these deviations, which the easiest ones for the EDC to trigger would be out of window visits, but they don't always do that. So it's really up to the CRA. And if the site is not aware that they committed a deviation and the CRA, for whatever reason, misses it as well, the next person or the next regulatory body that might find it is the FDA, and you don't want that. You don't want the FDA to be the first one to discover a deviation at a site. So it's supposed to be the site finding it first. Usually they don't, and that's why we have CRAs to do this. And then if the deviation is a process issue, or it's something that's consistently happening at that site, the CRA might need to document retraining of the staff for that issue. Maybe even do a corrective action, preventative action, what's called a CAPA plan, CAPA, corrective action, preventative action. So that would definitely be the case in giving a subject the wrong dose, or giving another subject's investigational product. Okay, those are major safety issues and questionable site practices, which would require not only retraining, but a corrective action and preventative action plan from the site.